Hello everyone, I'm Emma Biggins and I work at the Lasallian Retreat Centre, St Cassian's, which is in Kintbury in England. I was a primary school teacher for 12 years, mainly in Liverpool, and I moved to Kintbury and the Lasallian family 11 years ago. This session is split into two parts. I'll be taking you through the first bit and Joe Millay will lead you through the second. We will be taking you through some of the key elements of the founding story and hopefully sharing how something that began many centuries ago still has relevance to us today. My job is to give you a flavour of the life of De La Salle, who he was, where he came from, and how he became our founder. There is a lot to the story of De La Salle, and in the 10 minutes I have, we are just going to be able to scratch the surface. His father was Monsieur Louis De La Salle and his mother Nicole Moet. For us, this means that our founder's mother is from the famous Champagne region, and there's a bottle of Moet in the photos there for the eagle-eyed amongst you. Being from a wealthy family also meant that De La Salle was well educated. College de Bon Enfant was the school De La Salle attended after having private tutors when educated at home. Much was expected of Jean-Baptiste De La Salle. As the eldest of 7 siblings, a lot was resting on his shoulders. The De La Salle family lived within this area in the city of Reims. In fact, all of his childhood was within this mile radius. His school, the cathedral, his mother's family home, even the Archbishop's palace, all of it almost within touching distance of each other. So all of De La Salle's life was in this safe space, in a well-to-do area in the city of Reims. Whilst only 15, he received the canonry of the Reims Cathedral and was ordained to the priesthood at the age of 27. The cathedral was central to life for De La Salle in his upbringing. He was very happy to be part of the church and living a very comfortable life. So De La Salle was set for life, his road mapped out for him, priesthood, wealth, a very comfortable lifestyle, and that's how it went for a while. But a chance meeting on a doorstep changed the course of history for De La Salle and for educators everywhere. An opportunistic meeting on the doorstep of Sisters of the Child Jesus between Adrian Niel and Jean-Baptiste De La Salle led to De La Salle being asked to set up schools for poor boys in the city. Now, at that time in France, you had to pay for your education, which ruled out so many boys who went without any schooling at all. De La Salle had to decide whether to commit to helping this man who confronted him on the doorstep, or to continue along the path set out for him. Now, to put De La Salle's situation in context, there's a little background information. His parents had died within a year of each other, in 1671-72, and this meant that De La Salle had to execute his father's will, manage the family finances, assume the role of the head of the household and guardian of his brothers and sisters, and he carried on his studies and followed his path into priesthood. Adrian Niel was the catalyst to the work that De La Salle undertook. De La Salle had had no inclination previously to open schools or become a teacher. He'd had no desire to run schools for poor boys. But he soon realised that there was a need, at that time, for schools for those who would usually miss out because they couldn't afford it. So this chance meeting on a doorstep led to De La Salle becoming involved not only in the opening of the schools, but he went on to invest his time and money to how they ran. His acceptance that opening this school was God's will led to him accepting eventually that he needed to be fully involved in the project. After a while, De La Salle recognised he needed to be more hands-on and would need to take on the running of these schools. It was clear that the schoolmasters needed instruction and that he would need to step in. This led to him taking on the role of teacher and mentor to those men involved in the education of the boys. He even went as far as inviting the schoolmasters into his house, a move that would have been unheard of, especially as he was still the head of the family and responsible for his brothers and sisters. He moved out of his comfort zone, quite literally out of the safe red zone, and into the poorer area of Reims. In 1683, De La Salle responded to further need. At a time of severe famine, he gave away all his possessions and wealth to feed the poor. This shocked the schoolmasters and his own family even more. But it proved that De La Salle believed wholeheartedly in a project that had begun on a doorstep, but soon snowballed into a new education style, and one that continues to influence even today. He had a path laid out for him from being very young. He had always wanted to be a priest. He couldn't have foreseen the steps along his journey that would change the course of his life completely. He'd never intended to become a teacher, and yet he found himself in charge of schools, teachers, and students at a time of great need. It was a challenge that he rose to and consequently dedicated his life to. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that everything was plain sailing for De La Salle, that he met Adrian Niel on the doorstep, agreed, opened the schools, and all was rosy. If you read more into the story of De La Salle, you uncover that he faced many objections to what he was doing. Free education was unheard of, and he upset many people and made many enemies. One thing that struck me when I first heard the story of De La Salle was that it all could have been so very different. It's a real sliding doors moment. A meeting, on a doorstep, an invitation, a request for help, a response to a need, led De La Salle down a whole different path and a journey into a life he could not have expected. One yes led to a commitment that led to another yes, further commitment, and so on. And that's something I think that many of us can relate to today. But for now, this is where we will leave the history books on De La Salle. That's my bit done. A flying visit through some of the key moments in De La Salle's life that lead us to where we find ourselves today. I'm now going to hand over to Joe, who will delve a little deeper into that story.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo Millay, and I'm Director of Formation and Vocation Ministry for our district of Ireland, Great Britain and Malta. So we've heard today about the journey of De La Salle, the transitions and transformations he went through, and those key moments which changed the course of De La Salle's life to be the mission that we all share today. It seems right to begin at this moment, the moment when De La Salle was asked by Adrian Niel to help to set up a free school for poor boys, a request that diverted De La Salle on a new course, but one filled with purpose, grit and determination. A purpose and passion so strong that it still continues over 300 years later. We will all probably experience or have experienced the notion that one commitment can lead to another, often without us being completely aware of it. For instance, we're all here working in education. We all have different roles. We bring who we are to the position that we hold. And sometimes it's only when you stop for a moment and look back, you think, wow, that job I had when I was 18, it led me to the next stage and the next stage until this moment that we share now. One commitment leads to another, and then before you know it, you're woven so deeply into the fabric of what you do and those you serve, you can't ever see a different way. De La Salle experienced this, and in one of his meditations states that God, who directs all things with wisdom and moderation, and who does not force the will of men, wishing to have me completely occupied with the care of the schools, involved me unexpectedly and over a long period of time, so that one commitment led to another without me being aware of it. In other meditations, De La Salle does say, indeed, if I'd ever thought that the care I was taking of the schoolmasters out of pure charity would have ever made it my duty to live with them, I'd have dropped the whole project. But as De La Salle knew all those years ago, and we know today, once you start to work with young people, once you start to build those relationships and touch those hearts, you know there's no going back. No one went into education to deal with the effects of a global pandemic, but one commitment led to another to mean that we're the adults in school, ensuring our schools run well, that our children are educated and that they remain safe. One commitment leads to another, so that before we know it, we are the fabric of our schools and centres, and ultimately our Lasallian mission. And from the very beginning, De La Salle was all about responding to the needs at that time, And that's certainly a thread that weaves right through the Lasallian story as it develops over the past 300 and more years. And the concept of the popular tuition-free school open to all, that wasn't original to De La Salle. His real originality lay in his administrative skills, in providing schools with dedicated and trained teachers, in his recognition that teaching was a true vocation for the laymen in the church, in his scope of his work and his attention to the maladjusted child. And De La Salle was continually in dialogue with the experienced teachers with whom he worked, and after his death in 1719, the dynamism of his thought was translated into action by new generations of brothers and continually adapted in response to new situations. De La Salle would tell the brothers that what was needed was a teacher whose demeanour was both firm and gentle, who conveyed a sense of affection for his students. And he also warned them that the main reason for a student to stay off school or to truant lessons was down to a lack of relationship with the teacher, and that the teacher didn't always try to win them over. But simply, De La Salle urged his teachers to love their students and to find ways to win their hearts. And De La Salle often said that it was so important to find that right balance between having the firmness of a father and the tenderness of a mother, and to individualise learning, but also the correction and praise in ways which best suited the child. So in establishing schools back in the 17th century, De La Salle was very forward-thinking, empathetic, responsive to needs, and although he was relationship-centred, he also considered ways in which to correct a child's behaviour. His advice to brothers would be, avoid at all costs demeaning the student, individualise correction in light of the student and of the offence. De La Salle's vision was rooted in the gospel, and he understood clearly that telling a child that God loves them, it's not enough. Young people need to be shown God's love, and it's through the school and the relationship with the teacher that this love is shown. In responding to needs, De La Salle recognised that there were consequences to the deprived lives of some of the poorest children at that time, such as sterile affections, stunted intellect, physical neglect, and a lack of moral values. And he quickly came to realise that this was not only found in the poor. He saw that parental neglect and ignorance were often part of the problem. And an interesting point here is that De La Salle didn't seek to blame parents. Instead, he looked to analyse the problem, look for solutions, create the right environment for change. So again, taking a fresh and forward-thinking approach to situations. And through his research, De La Salle saw that there were three main causes for maladjustment in children: disturbed emotional relationships in families, a lack of a role model and value system, and parental neglect. And in order to combat these factors that were present in many of the children's lives, De La Salle would say that it was down to the example that the school and the teachers provided that would be the change needed in their lives. And these are all factors, I'm sure we'd agree, that are still prevalent today as barriers to learning and to keeping children safe in education. And De La Salle fell for education because he could see just how transformative it was on the young people that he and the schools served. By providing free education for those who needed it most, by promoting relationship-centred, empathetic teaching, he was able to develop a lifelong mission which has inspired and transformed education so that it's still a mission that holds true today. Education which remembers that at the heart of everything are human beings with lives, feelings, experiences that are essentially the image and likeness of God. That's a powerful form of education. And taking this lead from De La Salle and living this out every day is the way that we experience our Lasallian mission, become the Lasallian mission, and share our Lasallian mission for future generations to come. Thank you.